WTAP looks back on this day in history in today's We the People, celebrating 250 years.
On April 27, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln instructed General Winfield Scott to suspend habeas corpus as necessary to keep vital transport and supply lines clear in Maryland. Federal Judge Roger Taney, the Chief Justice for the Supreme Court, issued a ruling that Lincoln did not have the authority to suspend habeas corpus. During a 4th of July speech, Lincoln was defiant, insisting that he needed to suspend the rules in order to put down the rebellion in the South.
A moment to reflect, a time to remember. Join WTAP in celebrating We the People. Watch This Day in History every day on WTAP News at 6, proudly sponsored by WVU Medicine Camden Clark.